A medieval map shows the coast of Brazil decades before Columbus set sail. This is the profound mystery of the Portolan charts. By the end of this exploration, you will see the age of discovery in a completely new light. How did 13th century cartographers draw coastlines with near-modern precision? What lost knowledge are these vellum scrolls trying to tell us? These maps are not decorations. They are arguments, challenging the official story written in our textbooks. What does it mean when the evidence suggests our history might be missing entire chapters? To understand the mystery, you must first see the object itself. Picture a large, crackling sheet of stretched animal skin, darkened with age. Across its surface, a dense web of straight lines fans out from intricate, multi-point noses. The coastlines are drawn in stark, confident ink, every bay and headland rendered with a startling clarity. Names of ports and landmarks are scribbled in tight, medieval script, often in mixtures of Latin, Catalan, or Italian. This is a Portolan chart. It feels less like a map for a king's library and more like a working manual, something stained by salt spray and handled by a pilot plotting a course from Genoa to Alexandria. While other maps of the era showed a symbolic, faith-based world with Jerusalem at its center, these charts were ruthlessly practical. They ignored the interior of continents almost entirely, focusing solely on the usable edges of the sea. Their genius lies in that web of lines, the Rhumb lines. Each one represents a fixed compass bearing. A sailor could draw a line from his departure point to his destination and simply follow that single, constant heading across open water, a revolutionary technique for the time. This was not speculative cartography. It was born from the daily, dangerous needs of Mediterranean merchants and naval captains, and that is what makes the puzzle so compelling. We are not looking at a fanciful drawing from an isolated monk. We are analyzing the technical document of a professional mariner, a document whose accuracy should be impossible for its era. The very craftsmanship of these charts whispers that their makers knew far more about the shape of the world than history has ever admitted. Yet this practical, almost mundane origin makes their most baffling inclusions all the more extraordinary. For tucked within the navigational lines of certain charts, there appears a ghost. The most famous example is not a classic Portolan, but a map deeply indebted to their lost sources, the Piri Reis chart of 1513. Compiled by an Ottoman admiral, the map famously includes a ragged landmass at its southern edge. For centuries, this was considered a curiosity, perhaps a misdrawn version of South America. But in the mid-20th century, a claim emerged that would ignite decades of debate. When compared to modern seismic surveys of the bedrock beneath Antarctica's ice, the shape on the Piri Reis map seemed to align, not with the icy coastline we see today, but with the subglacial coastline of the continent, a landmass buried under miles of ice for millions of years. The implication was staggering. Could this chart be evidence that someone, long before Captain James Cook's 18th century voyages, had mapped a continent that would not be officially discovered until 1820? We must dissect this claim with a scholar's care, separating sensational possibility from documented evidence. The alignment is controversial, and many mainstream cartographers offer a more grounded explanation. They argue the landmass is far more likely a distorted, composite representation of South America's eastern coast, blended with speculative geography from classical Greek theories of a great southern land, or terra australis. This was a common cartographic tradition for filling blank spaces on a map. Yet, even this rational explanation circles back to a profound question. If the feature is a guess, it is an astonishingly lucky one, placed roughly where a continent actually exists. If it is a corrupted memory from an ancient source, what civilization could have possessed that knowledge? and how did it survive into the medieval era to be copied onto vellum? This single anomaly forces us to confront the true limits of what medieval sailors might have known or thought they knew. It suggests that the Portolan charts were not created in a vacuum, but were perhaps the final link in a long and fragmented chain of geographic knowledge, a chain that may have stretched back to antiquity. The Piri Reis map, with its ghostly southern land, acts as a haunting clue. It does not give us answers, but it powerfully frames the central mystery we are exploring. Where did this data come from? The search for that source pulls us back even further in time, into the shadows of civilizations whose own records have turned to dust. The ghost on the Piri Reis map forces a difficult question. If this data was not invented, who could have gathered it? To find an answer, we must sail back through time, long before the medieval mapmaker's pen touched vellum, to the very foundations of Western cartography. Here, in the libraries of Alexandria and the courts of Rome, we encounter the first and most scholarly candidate for the source of this lost knowledge, the legacy of ancient Greece and Rome. This was an era of measurement and reason, where scholars like Claudius Ptolemy, in the 2nd century after the Common Era, attempted nothing less than a mathematical description of the entire world. Ptolemy's work was not a simple sketch. He devised a system of longitude and latitude, plotted thousands of locations with coordinates, and created complex map projections to represent the curved Earth on a flat surface. His geography was a masterpiece of theoretical cartography, a system for plotting the known world by degrees and angles. Then history turned a page. With the fragmentation of the Roman Empire, Ptolemy's meticulous science faded from Western European memory. His texts did not vanish, however. They were preserved, studied, and enhanced by scholars in the Islamic world and in the Byzantine Empire, where this classical knowledge was kept alive and illuminated for centuries. Then, in the 15th century, a cultural tide shifted. Ptolemy's geography was translated from Greek and Arabic back into Latin, flooding into Italy just as the Renaissance was beginning to bloom. This timing is crucial. The sudden re-emergence of this sophisticated geographic framework coincided almost perfectly with the golden age of Portolan chartmaking. The theory, therefore, seems elegant and logical. Perhaps the Portolan charts are not born from mystery, but from scholarship. They could represent the thrilling fusion of recovered Greek theory with hard-won medieval practice. Imagine a Genos cartographer, a new Latin copy of Ptolemy open on his desk, using its coordinate system to refine the coastal reports brought back by sailors. This would explain the sudden leap in accuracy, a scientific revolution applied to the sea. Yet, for all its appeal, this theory encounters a stubborn coastline of its own. Ptolemy's world, for all its genius, was still limited. His map of the Earth ended with a vast, unknown ocean at the west and a landlocked Indian Ocean to the south. His coordinates could not describe lands he never knew existed. So how, then, do we explain the uncanny precision of a Portolan chart depicting the intricate contours of a place like the Baltic Sea, a region far beyond the edges of Ptolemy's maps, or the startlingly accurate shape of the Arabian Peninsula? The classical legacy provides the tools, the magnificent grid upon which to place information, but it does not provide the information itself, the empirical detail, the feel of a coastline surveyed by someone who had actually been there. That data had to come from somewhere else. This realization shifts the search from the quiet of the library to the rolling decks of ships and to the hands of the people who spent their lives reading the waves. Classical library could provide the grid but not the data. For the raw, empirical truth of a coastline, you must go to the people who knew it with their hands and their lives. This leads us to the second and most widely accepted explanation for the Portolan miracle, one built not on dusty scrolls but on the salt-stained logs of working sailors. Imagine the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 voyages. For generations, Mediterranean mariners kept detailed personal notebooks called Rutters. These were not maps but written sailing directions, a captain's private memory of a route. They recorded everything, the bearing from one headland to the next, the depth of water in a particular bay, the color of the seabed, even the smell of the wind off a specific cape. A rutter was a lived experience translated into practical text. Now, picture the bustling cartographic workshops in ports like Genoa, Venice, or the island of Majorca. Here, master chartmakers acted as intellectual hubs. They would have collected, compared, and synthesized these thousands of individual rutters, sent back by ships from across the known sea. Through a slow, meticulous process of cross-referencing, they distilled 1,000 voices into a single, authoritative visual chorus, the Portolan chart. This is a profoundly democratic idea of knowledge creation. The chart does not descend from a king or a philosopher. It emerges from the collective, hard-won experience of countless anonymous sailors. It is a bottom-up database compiled and refined over decades. This theory beautifully explains the stunning, almost photographic accuracy of coastlines along well-traveled routes, like the journey from Barcelona to Constantinople. The chart is a corporate secret of the maritime republics, a priceless competitive edge etched onto vellum. It is a testament to the power of shared observation. Yet, for all its compelling logic, this pragmatic origin story encounters a formidable headwind when we sail beyond the familiar. The theory relies on a constant traffic of ships, a feedback loop of sailors constantly verifying and updating the data. So how does it account for the appearance of distant, intricate coastlines where no regular medieval trade routes are known to have existed? If these charts are simply compilations of common sailor knowledge, then the presence of certain lands implies that common sailors were going there, quietly and consistently, long before any official expedition was recorded. The collective wisdom theory is powerful, but it pushes us toward a startling and necessary question. What if the anonymous voyages were not confined to the Mediterranean, but ventured far out into the vast, terrifying expanse of the Atlantic Ocean? The collective wisdom theory forces a confrontation with the blank spaces on the map. If chartmakers relied solely on verified sailor reports, what did they do when the report stopped and the parchment stretched into emptiness? To answer this, we must examine a map that exists in the troubling space between record and rumor, the Zeno map of the late 1400s. According to a published account, two Venetian brothers, Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, sailed into the North Atlantic in the late 1300s, decades before Columbus. Their narrative, released long after their passing, came with a chart depicting strange, detailed islands with names like Frisland and Estatiland, lands unknown to modern geography. The map itself is a classic Portolan in style, its coastlines drawn with that same confident, practical line work, but it describes a phantom geography. Most scholars today view it as a clever compilation of older maps, blended with sailors' yarns and perhaps outright invention, possibly created to bolster a family's prestige. Yet its very existence is a masterclass in understanding the medieval mapmaker's dilemma. Here was a document that looked and felt authoritative, woven from the same tradition as the ruthlessly accurate Mediterranean charts, but it ventured into the realm of the speculative. This presents a critical question. Did the cartographers who made such charts knowingly insert fairy tales, or were they incorporating the best information they had, reports from sailors who swore they had seen land in the mist, or who had heard tales from others who claimed the same? A fog bank on the horizon could become an island. A story told in a tavern for the price of an ale could become a coastline. The Zeno map shows us the Portolan chart as a living, breathing document, one that did not simply record known geography, but actively tried to synthesize it, to make sense of a world still largely shrouded in mystery. It blended the hard, verifiable data of the Mediterranean with the whispers and wishes of the Atlantic. This practice of filling blanks with plausible geography was common, but it creates a profound problem for modern investigators. When we look at these ancient charts and see a coastline that seems to match a real one, like the Eastern Americas, how can we tell if we are looking at a lucky guess, a corrupted myth, or a genuine record of a voyage that history forgot? The Zeno map, a likely fabrication, teaches us to be cautious, but it also prepares the ground for a far more radical idea. What if some of those whispers from the Atlantic were not myths at all, but distant, distorted echoes of something real? The whispers from the Atlantic, those tantalizing fragments on vellum, present a historian's greatest challenge. How do you separate a genuine whisper from a clever echo? This challenge crystallizes in a single, infamous document that forces us to confront the very nature of evidence. It is called the Vinland Map. On its surface, it is the ultimate prize for any believer in lost voyages. Drawn on medieval parchment and dated to around 1440, it depicts Europe, Africa, and Asia in the familiar style of its time. But in the northwest Atlantic, it shows a large, jagged island labeled in Latin Vinland. According to Norse sagas, Vinland was the name given to the coast of North America explored by Leif Erikson around the year 1000. If authentic, this map would not merely be a clue, it would be a smoking gun, proving that knowledge of the New World was not only possessed by Norse explorers, but was also circulating among European cartographers a full half-century before Columbus. The implications would be revolutionary. For decades after its public unveiling in the 1960s, the map was a lightning rod. Its parchment was genuine, carbon dated to the correct period. The handwriting and style seemed plausible. It fit a beautiful narrative, a tangible link between the Viking sagas and the wider cartographic tradition. It was for many the answer they had been searching for, but extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof, and the story was about to take a sharp turn into the laboratory. The real detective work began not with historians but with chemists. When scientists analyzed the ink on the Vinland map using advanced techniques like electron microscopy and X-ray spectroscopy, they found something unsettling. The black lines contained a compound called anatase, a specific synthetic form of titanium dioxide. This particular substance was not available in the 15th century. It is a product of 20th century industrial chemistry, first commercially produced in the 1920s. The presence of this modern pigment in the ink lines is, for most experts, a definitive fingerprint of forgery. The parchment is old, but the drawing upon it is not. The Vinland map, it seems, is a masterful fake, a modern creation skillfully placed on authentic medieval material to create the illusion of a monumental discovery. This saga is far more than a footnote about a fraudulent map. It is a crucial cautionary tale for anyone drawn to historical mysteries. It reveals a powerful human truth. Our deep desire to find proof, to solve a puzzle, can sometimes make us see what we wish to see. We might overlook inconsistencies or embrace shaky evidence because it confirms a story we find compelling. The Vinland Map episode teaches a rigorous lesson. It forces us to apply the tools of forensic science to the romance of history, to let evidence, however disappointing, lead the way. This principle of skeptical scrutiny is not a door closing on mystery, but a tool for cleaning the lens. We must bring that same careful, scientific eye to every anomaly on the Portolan charts, not to dismiss them, but to ask with even greater clarity. If the easy answer is a forgery, what does that mean for the harder, more persistent questions that remain? Yet the failure of the Vinland map as evidence does not diminish the mystery. It simply refocuses our search from a single, dramatic clue to a more complex and compelling reality. The true source of the Portolan chart's power likely wasn't a single lost voyage, but a vibrant, living exchange of knowledge. We find its greatest expression not in a shadowy forgery, but in the brilliant light of the Mediterranean sun on the island of Majorca. In the 14th century, this Balearic island became the undisputed epicenter of cartographic genius. Here, in bustling workshops overlooking the sea, the practical Portolan chart transformed into something breathtaking. The Majorcan school did not just draw coastlines, they synthesized worlds. Their masterpieces, like the magnificent Catalan atlas created by Abraham Cresques and his son Jehuda, were lavish works of art intended for kings, yet their foundation was pure Portolan precision. They took the web of Rhumb lines and the accurate shapes of the sea and expanded them, painting in the interiors of continents with cities, rivers, and rulers based on the latest accounts from travelers and scholars. This was where Marco Polo's descriptions of Cathay met the astronomical tables of Arab mathematicians and the Rutters of Zeno sailors. Think of it as a medieval information hub, a physical place where data streams from across the known world converged. A Jewish cartographer like Cresques could read Arabic texts, consult with Christian navigators, and incorporate details from Jewish travelers who served as links between cultures. This was not an age of isolated knowledge. In Majorca, the Mediterranean's three great intellectual traditions, Christian, Jewish, and Islamic, worked in a kind of collaborative dialogue, often through the shared languages of commerce and science. The result was a leap in perspective. The Portolan, born as a tool for getting from port to port, evolved under the Majorcans into an instrument for contemplating the entire globe. Their maps asked bigger questions. What lies beyond the Pillars of Hercules? How does the land of Prester John connect to the Silk Road? They visualized exploration itself. This multicultural synthesis offers a powerful, grounded explanation for the chart's sophistication. It suggests the engine for their advancement was not a forgotten civilization, but the vibrant, connected intellectual culture of the medieval Mediterranean itself. Knowledge could travel faster than a ship, passed from a scholar in Baghdad to a translator in Toledo to a chartmaker in Majorca, and finally onto Vellum. The extraordinary accuracy of a coastline, then, might be the product of this brilliant collaborative network, constantly testing, updating, and refining a shared model of the world. The Majorcan school shows us that the mystery may not be a lack of explanation, but a failure to fully appreciate the explanatory power of the era's own interconnected genius. The intricate network of lines is more than decoration, it is the chart's beating heart. To truly grasp the Portolan's revolutionary power, you must see it not as a picture, but as a machine, a brilliant piece of pre-digital navigation software. Those straight lines radiating from the ornate, multi-pointed stars are called Rhumb lines, and they represent a fixed compass direction, like due north or southeast by east. The decorative stars themselves are wind roses, serving as both artistic flourish and functional compass points from which this navigational web is spun. Here is how this elegant system worked in practice. A sea captain, perhaps in the port of Genoa and bound for Alexandria, would take his ruler and place it on the chart between those 2 points. He would then look at the dense fan of Rhumb lines around him and find the single line that ran perfectly parallel to his ruler's edge. That line gave him his magic number, his constant bearing. He would order his helmsman to set the ship's compass to that exact heading and hold it day after day, trusting the line to lead him across open water directly to his destination. This was a monumental leap. Before this system, coastal navigation was often a cautious, nerve-wracking affair of hugging the shoreline, using landmarks to creep from one known point to the next. The Portolan chart, with its Rhumb line grid, unlocked the open sea. It allowed a navigator to strike out with confidence across deep water, saving immense time and avoiding treacherous coastal hazards. It democratized the most advanced navigation of the era, putting a repeatable, mathematical precision into the hands of any captain who could afford a chart. But the genius runs deeper than its use. The creation of this web reveals an even more profound level of organization. To draw a single, accurate Rhumb line from, say, Barcelona to Constantinople, a cartographer needed two crucial pieces of data: the precise geographic positions of those two ports and a consistent measurement of the compass bearing between them. This implies something staggering: a systematic, large-scale effort of data collection. It was not enough for one sailor to have a rough idea of the direction. This required the compilation of countless bearing measurements, taken over many voyages, to establish a reliable average that accounted for shifting winds, currents, and the subtle drift of magnetic north. The chartmaker was not just drawing a line, he was codifying a consensus of lived experience. This network, therefore, is a silent testament to a vast, collaborative project spanning generations and the entire Mediterranean basin. It hints at an organized maritime culture engaged in a constant, collective experiment to measure their world by degrees and angles. The Rhumb lines are the physical evidence of that project, a frozen snapshot of centuries of accumulated directional knowledge. They transform the chart from a mere map into a clockwork instrument for traversing the unknown, and in doing so, they whisper of a level of medieval scientific ambition we are only beginning to fully appreciate. This elegant navigational machine, however, had a profound and puzzling limitation. Astonishingly, the most accurate Portolan charts completely lacked a consistent scale or a grid of latitude and longitude. Think about that for a moment. These maps could guide a sailor flawlessly from Lisbon to Tunis, yet they contained no numbered coordinates, no uniform measurement of distance from a fixed point. Their astonishing precision in shape and relative position was achieved through an entirely different kind of logic, one born from the sailor's direct experience of the world. This method is called topological drawing. It is less about absolute position on a globe and more about the correct sequence and connection of places. Imagine you are a sailor describing your journey to a friend. You would not say you sailed for precisely 237 miles at a bearing of 105 degrees. You would say you left the harbor, passed the red cliffs on your left, rounded the rocky point after a day's sail, and then saw the lighthouse on the distant headland. The Portolan chart captures exactly this perspective. It gets the order of ports and headlands perfectly correct, and it records the angular relationships between them as seen from the deck of a ship. It was a magnificent, large-scale exercise in connect the dots, where the dots were ports and the lines were the constant compass bearings, or Rhumb lines, between them. Distance was estimated not by miles but by travel time, a unit called a day's sail. This empirical, experience-based method could produce locally accurate sections of coastline with breathtaking fidelity. A chart of the Adriatic Sea, compiled from thousands of voyages between Venice and Dubrovnik, would be virtually perfect for its intended purpose. But this approach creates a monumental cartographic puzzle. How did the mapmakers align these separate, perfectly rendered local sections into a single, coherent whole? If you have one perfectly drawn puzzle piece for Italy and another for North Africa, how do you know how far apart to place them on the blank vellum? Without a master coordinate system like latitude and longitude to act as a universal scaffold, even tiny errors in estimated sailing times would compound dramatically over long distances. The relative position of Spain to England or of Greece to Egypt would rely on the accumulated guesswork of countless voyage reports. This inherent limitation is what makes the chart's broader continental outline so deeply perplexing. When we look at a chart like the Medici Atlas, which shows the entire western coast of Africa with a recognizable shape, we are confronted with a paradox. The topological method explains the detail, but not the grand silhouette. To achieve that continental outline with any accuracy, a cartographer would need some form of guiding template, a reference that established the correct proportional relationships between landmasses separated by vast, open ocean. The empirical data from coastal sailors could tell you what came next along the shore, but it could not reliably tell you how that long, curving shoreline related to another continent thousands of miles away. The stunning coherence of these maps, therefore, whispers of a possible external framework, a lost chart or a body of knowledge that provided the big picture onto which the meticulous local details could be hung. The Portolan charts stand as a magnificent achievement of bottom-up observation, yet their grandest shapes hint at a top-down vision of the world that their own methods could not possibly have created from scratch. But if the empirical method of sailors could not create the grand continental shapes, and the scholarly legacy of Ptolemy could not provide the data, where did the big picture come from? This leads us to the third and most controversial theoretical source, the idea of a phantom template. Imagine a single, magnificent world map, crafted with a precision lost to the ages, perhaps from the height of the Roman Empire or salvaged from the legendary Library of Alexandria. Proponents of this theory argue that such a map, a secret master blueprint, is the only explanation for the sudden, fully formed appearance of the Portolan style and its startlingly accurate continental outlines. In this narrative, medieval chartmakers were not inventors but inheritors. They possessed a faded, precious relic, a cartographic Rosetta Stone. Their work for generations was not to explore anew, but to carefully copy, update, and translate this ancient template onto new vellum, grafting the latest names of ports and the reports of contemporary sailors onto a framework whose original creators had been forgotten by time. The theory is deeply romantic. It solves the mystery with a single, elegant object, a lost chapter of human knowledge that survived the collapse of empires in some monastic scriptorium or royal treasury. It appeals to our love for a grand, unifying secret. Yet, for all its narrative power, the phantom template theory stands on a foundation of profound questions. If such a map existed, who made it? What civilization possessed the technology and the geographic reach to survey coastlines from Scandinavia to West Africa, or perhaps even farther, with such fidelity? The Romans were brilliant engineers, but their mapping focused on their road networks and provinces, not on the precise contours of oceanic coastlines beyond their empire. The theory, in trying to answer one mystery, creates several more, each more daunting than the last. Furthermore, there is a complete absence of physical evidence. Not a single fragment of this purported master map has ever been found, nor is it clearly described in any surviving medieval inventory. Its existence is an inference, a ghost invoked to explain the uncanny accuracy of the charts we do have. This does not make the idea meaningless, however. It represents the ultimate expression of the lost knowledge narrative, a siren call that asks us to consider the fragility of history itself. It forces a humbling reflection. How much of humanity's collective understanding has simply vanished, turned to dust in a library fire, or lost in the damp hold of a sunken ship? The phantom template may not be a literal map, but it serves as a powerful metaphor for the possibility that our linear timeline of discovery is incomplete, that leaps in knowledge can come from rediscovering the achievements of a much deeper past. While the search for a single, secret source map may be a historical cul-de-sac, the questions it raises are vital. They push us to look beyond easy answers and to sit with the genuine, unresolved wonder of these objects. The charts themselves remain, their lines whispering not of one secret, but of many layered truths waiting to be untangled. The Piri Reis map is not just a chart, it is a confession. In the year 1513, an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis compiled a world map of stunning ambition. What makes this document priceless is not merely its controversial southern landmass, but the detailed notes the admiral himself wrote in its margins. He tells us in his own hand where his information came from. He cites no fewer than 20 source maps and charts, a list that reads like a cartographic detective's dream. Among them, he claims, were maps used by Christopher Columbus himself on his voyages to the west, and even charts from the legendary Library of Alexandria. Here, in one document, we have a direct claim linking the medieval Portolan tradition, the fresh discoveries of the age of exploration, and the ghostly knowledge of antiquity. This makes the Piri Reis map a unique and critical artifact, a snapshot of a world in radical transition. It is a palimpsest, a single sheet of vellum layered with information from different centuries and cultures, all pressed together into one bewildering image. The coast of Brazil is drawn with the confident, practical line work of a Portolan sailor, yet it sits beside fantastical creatures and textual notes about the customs of the people there, information gleaned from Columbus' crew. The Mediterranean is rendered with familiar precision, while the interior of Africa contains elements borrowed from much older classical geographies. Piri Reis was not creating from nothing, he was synthesizing, trying to make a coherent whole from fragments that often contradicted each other. His notes are filled with a scholar's passion and a historian's lament. He speaks of a great world map now lost that was used in the Library of Alexandria, and he bemoans how many charts have been destroyed or forgotten. This map, therefore, is a powerful testament to the fragility of knowledge. It shows us the very moment when the old, secretive world of the Portolan chartmakers was colliding with the new flood of data from transatlantic voyages. The admiral was standing at a crossroads, looking backward at a tapestry of inherited wisdom and forward into a vast, unmapped ocean, trying desperately to stitch it all together before any more threads were lost. This immense complexity is why the map resists easy explanation. To untangle a single coastline on the Piri Reis is to attempt to trace its path through a labyrinth of sources, asking at every turn, did this come from a Portuguese sailor's rutter, a copied Catalan Portolan, a surviving Ptolemaic coordinate, or a tale told by a Genos adventurer? It embodies the central challenge of our entire inquiry, proving that the search for a single origin is often a search for a phantom. The truth is layered, contradictory, and magnificent in its tangled entirety. The Admiral's confession reveals a world where knowledge was a fragile, traded commodity. This brings us to the fourth and most speculative theoretical source, the idea of pre-Columbian trans-oceanic contact. Could the startlingly accurate depiction of lands across the Atlantic stem not from a lost map, but from actual, unrecorded voyages? This theory asks us to radically reimagine the oceans of the medieval world not as impassable barriers, but as potential highways traversed by skilled mariners long before the official age of discovery. It proposes that explorers from ancient or distant civilizations, Phoenician traders, Roman merchant ships, Chinese treasure fleets, or even Polynesian wayfinders, may have successfully crossed the vast waters and returned home. Their geographical knowledge, perhaps a single coastline sketch on parchment or a story passed through generations, could have then filtered slowly into European cartographic circles through obscure trade routes, captured documents, or the tales of travelers in distant ports. The appeal of this idea is its directness. It offers a simple, human explanation for the data on the charts, a first-hand account from someone who had actually seen those distant shores. We can easily picture a storm-blown vessel surviving an unintended Atlantic crossing, its crew making a crude map of the new coast before attempting the perilous return journey. Such a sketch, treated as a curiosity or a sailor's tall tale, could have wound up centuries later in a Majorcan workshop, where a serious cartographer, recognizing its value, incorporated its shape into his master chart. This narrative satisfies our desire for a tangible source, a real voyage behind the mysterious lines. Yet, evaluating this theory requires a careful balance between open-minded possibility and rigorous historical evidence. The argument for such contact often points to intriguing but isolated artifacts and similarities. certain Roman coins found in the Americas, though often disputed in origin, or stylistic parallels in art or mythology across oceans spark endless debate. The sheer seafaring capability of cultures like the Polynesians, who navigated the Pacific by stars and currents, proves that long-distance ocean travel was certainly possible with the right knowledge. If they could cross the Pacific, could others have crossed the Atlantic? The logistical possibility is hard to deny. However, the argument against sustained, influential contact is anchored in a profound silence, the archaeological record. For such voyages to have provided the precise data suggested by the Portolan charts, they would need to have been more than accidental. They would imply return journeys, repeated contact, and a transfer of knowledge significant enough to be preserved and deemed credible by European mapmakers. Yet, across the Americas, archaeologists have not found the clear, undeniable evidence we would expect from such old-world presence like settlements, sustained trade goods, or introduced species that would have reshaped ecosystems. The absence of this evidence is a significant hurdle. It suggests that if contact occurred, it was likely fleeting, catastrophic, or so culturally isolated that it left no lasting material imprint on the continent itself. This theory, therefore, lies in the realm of the tantalizing maybe. It pushes the boundaries of orthodox history, challenging us to consider the gaps in our understanding not as empty spaces, but as realms of lost stories. While it may lack the concrete proof to move from hypothesis to accepted fact, its true value is in the perspective it forces upon us. It asks a fundamental question about human curiosity and capability. In a world vast and mostly unknown, is it more likely that every ocean remained untouched for millennia, or that a few brave, unlucky, or brilliant sailors, their names lost to time, glimpsed the other side and brought back a whisper that eventually found its way onto a piece of vellum? The charts do not answer this, but their persistent accuracy keeps the question alive, a ghost of a possibility sailing just beyond the edge of the historical record. Names are the hidden language of these charts. Beyond the lines and coastlines, the handwritten labels scribbled in ports and along capes tell a second, equally revealing story. These place names, or toponyms, are a historical fingerprint left by the countless sailors and traders who supplied the raw data. A single glance reveals a linguistic mosaic, a testament to the Mediterranean's interconnected world. You will see Italian names from Genoese merchants, Catalan labels from Majorcan navigators, Arabic terms from pilots who sailed the Red Sea, and even archaic Greek names preserved from classical texts. This mix is not random clutter, it is a direct record of who knew a place best, and through which cultural lens that knowledge entered the cartographic stream. Tracking the evolution of a single name across decades of charts becomes a detective story in philology. Take a landmark like the Strait of Gibraltar. On early charts, you might see its ancient name, the Pillars of Hercules. Later, as Muslim influence dominated the region, the Arabic name Jabal Tariq, meaning the Mountain of Tariq, appears. Eventually, this morphs into the Europeanized Gibraltar. Each change is a timestamp marking a shift in political control, trade dominance, or simply the adoption of a more current term by working mariners. This process shows the chartmakers in a fascinating new light. They were not just artists or surveyors, but meticulous editors. They constantly updated their vellum masterpieces, scratching out an old name and inserting a new one based on the latest reports from returning ships. We can watch the progress of exploration unfold in real time through this onomastic archaeology. As Portuguese caravels inched down the west coast of Africa in the 15th century, new names began appearing on Portolan charts with remarkable speed: Cabo Branco, Cabo Verde, names that documented each new landfall. This is the normal, expected pattern of knowledge transfer, a slow creep of accurate naming that follows the documented path of exploration. It confirms that the chart-making network was vibrant and responsive, a near real-time geographic news service. But this established pattern also gives us our most powerful tool for spotting the anomalous. If we find a chart that suddenly, accurately names a distant coastline decades or even a century before any known expedition could have possibly reached it, that is a glaring red flag. It would be a whisper of a source out of step with history, a name placed on the map with a confidence that should not exist. Such a discovery would not be proof of a specific voyage, but it would be a clue of the highest order, a signpost pointing toward a gap in our understanding. So we must become detectives of diction, scanning these ancient labels not just for what they say, but for when they say it. A single, precocious name in the right place could be the thread that unravels the entire mystery. The Vellum itself is a silent witness to the chartmaker's intent. Each Portolan chart begins not as an idea, but as the skin of a sheep or goat, subjected to a grueling, days-long transformation. The animal skin was soaked in lime, scraped clean of hair and flesh, stretched taut on a frame, and meticulously sanded with pumice until it achieved a flawless, uniform surface. This was parchment, a material chosen not for convenience but for permanence. It was expensive, labor-intensive, and supremely durable, resistant to the moisture and rough handling of a ship's cabin. The very choice of this substrate sends a clear message. These were not ephemeral notes. They were designed to endure, to be consulted across decades, perhaps even passed down as heirlooms of navigational wisdom. The inks that traced their precise lines carried a similar weight of purpose. Iron gall ink, made from oak galls, iron salts, and gum arabic, was the standard for important documents throughout the Middle Ages. It starts as a pale gray-blue but oxidizes over time into a deep, rich black, biting into the parchment to create lines that are famously permanent, a quality that has allowed these charts to speak to us across 7 centuries. Carbon-based inks from soot or lampblack were also used, offering a different kind of darkness. This material reality anchors the charts firmly in the tangible, medieval world of artisans and patrons. The production of a single major portolan was a significant investment, requiring the labor of a skilled parchment maker, a master scribe for the text, and the cartographer himself, who was often a combination of artist, scientist, and editor. The cost meant ownership was limited to powerful entities, the maritime republics like Venice or Genoa, the royal courts of Aragon or Portugal, or the wealthiest merchant princes whose fortunes depended on controlling trade routes. A portolan chart was a strategic asset, as valuable as a ship itself. This context of value and rarity makes their survival today a minor miracle. Out of the hundreds, perhaps thousands originally crafted, only about 180 are known to have survived the ravages of time, fire, and decay. Each one that reaches us is a survivor, and modern technology is now allowing us to listen to their stories in astonishing new ways. Techniques like multispectral imaging, which uses light beyond the visible spectrum, can peer beneath the surface. They reveal the cartographer's hidden corrections, places where a coastline was carefully scraped away and redrawn as new information arrived. They can uncover palimpsests, faint traces of even older writing or drawings that were erased so the precious parchment could be reused. In some cases, they can resurrect annotations that have faded to near invisibility, recovering lost names or notes. This forensic analysis transforms the chart from a static picture into a dynamic document. We can see the process of thinking, the moment of revision, the tangible evidence of the map being updated, which in itself is a record of geographical knowledge in flux. The physical object, therefore, is not just a container for the mystery, it is an active participant in the story. Its durability allowed the knowledge to be preserved. Its craftsmanship signals the seriousness with which that knowledge was held, and the scars and layers upon its surface now provide scientists with a new kind of map, a guide to the very human process of trying to capture a changing world on a sheet of prepared skin. The lines on a Portolan chart were not just routes, they were arteries of wealth. In the medieval Mediterranean, knowledge of the sea was the ultimate currency, more valuable than the cargo in any ship's hold. These charts were not academic exercises, they were instruments of economic warfare, guarded with a secrecy that rivaled any state intelligence operation. For the maritime republics of Venice, Genoa, and the Crown of Aragon, a single accurate chart represented a decisive advantage in the cutthroat competition for control of the spice trade, the silk routes, and the flow of gold. A captain who could sail a more direct path, avoid treacherous coasts, and reach a market ahead of his rivals could secure a fortune. This relentless drive for profit and power provides the most grounded, compelling engine for the chart's astonishing evolution. The improvement of these maps was not born from abstract curiosity, but from a concrete, urgent need. Better navigation meant faster voyages, lower risks, and higher profits. It was a direct investment with a measurable return. This economic imperative explains why wealthy merchant families and city-state treasuries were willing to fund the costly, dangerous work of exploration and data collection. They sponsored voyages not for glory but for intelligence. A returning captain's log detailing a new, safer passage or a previously unmapped harbor was a corporate secret of the highest order. That information would be rushed to a trusted cartographer in a secure workshop, where it was integrated into a master chart that was then copied only for a select few. Possession of the most accurate Portolan was a monopoly on reality itself, allowing a state to dictate the flow of commerce. This context transforms our understanding of the chart's possible secrets. If a Geno's captain sailing under a veil of commercial secrecy stumbled upon an unknown coastline far to the west, what would his patrons do? They would not announce the discovery to the world. They would classify it. They would treat that geographic data as a proprietary trade secret, to be exploited quietly for advantage, perhaps in search of new fishing grounds or alternative routes that bypassed their competitors. The record of that voyage would never enter the official chronicles of exploration. It would exist only as a corrected line on a privileged chart, a silent testament to a voyage that history was never meant to know. The economic engine, therefore, offers a perfectly rational pathway for the unexplained. It suggests that the leaps in accuracy we see on these vellums could be the direct result of clandestine, profit-driven expeditions, their successes hidden intentionally from rival states and from the pages of history. The Portolan chart, in this light, is the ultimate insider document, a coded ledger of commercial espionage written in coastline and compass rows. Its most baffling features may not be messages from a lost civilization, but the carefully guarded receipts of voyages that paid too well to ever be revealed. Yet for all their sophistication, the Portolan charts are missing a critical tool. They contain almost no information for navigating by the stars. You will search in vain for the graduated latitude scales based on the height of the North Star, a method perfected and routinely used by Arab navigators in the Indian Ocean. There are no diagrams for measuring the sun's angle at noon, no star charts for the southern hemisphere. These maps are stubbornly, purely terrestrial. They rely entirely on the magnetic compass and the visible coastline, a system of constant bearings and landmark recognition. This glaring omission is not a mistake. It is a profound clue about the world these charts were built to serve. They were engineered for a specific, sea-by-sight culture of Mediterranean and coastal Atlantic sailing, where a ship was rarely out of sight of land for more than a few days. In that enclosed world, the compass and a good memory for headlands were all you needed. The utility of the Portolan chart diminished rapidly once a ship ventured into the deep, open ocean, where the horizon offered no landmarks and navigation shifted to the celestial sphere, to measuring one's position by the sun and stars. This limitation is incredibly telling. It argues powerfully against the idea that the charts were copied from some global, ancient source map created by a seafaring civilization that mastered long-distance trans-oceanic travel. Any culture capable of mapping the world would have necessarily relied on celestial navigation to cross those vast, featureless waters, and that knowledge would have been embedded in their cartography. Its absence here is a silent but strong vote for a more grounded origin. It roots the Portolan tradition firmly in the practical, experiential world of medieval European sailors, a world where the sea was a known network of routes between familiar ports, not an endless void to be crossed. Even when these charts began to depict lands far beyond the Mediterranean, like the bulge of West Africa or the rumored islands of the Atlantic, they did so using the same coastal crawling logic. They extended the known world by stitching together reported coastlines, not by plotting points on a celestial grid. This celestial omission, therefore, draws a clear boundary around the chart's intended use. They are a product of a specific time and a specific way of seeing the sea, which makes their accurate depictions of distant shores not less mysterious, but more intriguing. It means that whatever source provided those shapes had to be interpreted and translated into a language these coastal pilots could understand, a translation that may have lost the original celestial instructions but preserved the startling outline of the land itself. The compass rose points us eastward to a source of knowledge often left out of the European narrative. In the year 1402, nearly a century before Columbus sailed, Korean scholars completed a monumental work of cartography called the Cangnyedo map. This was not a coastal chart for sailors, but a scholarly synthesis of the entire known world, drawing from Chinese, Islamic, and likely some fragmentary European sources. Its depiction of Africa, Europe, and Asia is astonishingly broad and coherent for its time, a testament to the vast geographic understanding cultivated in the courts of the Ming dynasty. This map's existence coincides with one of history's greatest, yet most overlooked, ages of exploration, the voyages of the Chinese admiral Zheng He. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He commanded a colossal treasure fleet, hundreds of ships carrying tens of thousands of men on diplomatic missions across the Indian Ocean, reaching the coast of Africa. These were not covert missions, but displays of immense power and curiosity. The fleet's navigators used detailed sailing charts and celestial guides far more advanced than anything in contemporary Europe. This presents a tantalizing fifth theoretical source for Portolan anomalies, the possibility of an east-to-west transfer of geographic data. Could knowledge gathered by Chinese explorers have traveled back along the Silk Road, or been exchanged in the bustling ports of the Indian Ocean, eventually filtering into the workshops of Majorca or Genoa? Imagine a Persian merchant in Calicut examining a scroll brought by a Chinese sailor that showed the detailed shape of Africa's eastern coast. That merchant later sells the scroll to an Arab trader who carries it to Alexandria, where a Catalan mapmaker copies a crucial segment. It is a chain of whispers across continents, a slow osmosis of knowledge through the capillaries of global trade. While no direct, documented link between Zheng He's charts and a specific Portolan has ever been found, the synchronicity is provocative. Here were two advanced maritime cultures on opposite sides of the world, simultaneously pushing the boundaries of cartography in the early 15th century. The Cangnyedo map and the Portolan charts, though different in purpose and style, both represent a peak of pre-modern geographic synthesis. Their parallel existence challenges the Eurocentric view of discovery, suggesting a connected world of information where ideas could flow across vast distances, even if the routes of that flow are now invisible to us. This connection remains a hypothesis, a ghost in the historical machine, but its value is in the perspective it forces. It expands the mystery beyond the Mediterranean, reminding us that the quest to map the world was a human endeavor, not merely a European one. The silence in the records is not proof of isolation, but an invitation to look harder at the spaces between civilizations, where knowledge, like trade goods, might have changed hands in a market square, leaving no receipt for historians to find. This visual timeline of the Atlantic is a history book written in Coastline and Vellum. If we lay out a series of Portolan charts from the early 1300s to the dawn of the 1600s, we witness a continent being born before our eyes. The earliest charts show a world that ends abruptly at the Strait of Gibraltar, with only the ghostly shapes of mythical islands like St. Brendan's Isle floating in the western void, places of legend rather than geography. Then, around the mid-1400s, something concrete emerges. The Azores and the Canary Islands solidify on the parchment, their positions fixed with the confident ink of verified report. This coincides perfectly with the documented Portuguese and Spanish expeditions that reclaimed these archipelagos for European maps. The narrative continues south. Chart by chart, the western bulge of Africa begins to stretch downward, a slow unrolling of terra incognita. Each new cape, Cabo Branco, Cabo Verde, the formidable Cabo das Tormentas, appears in sequence, a direct cartographic shadow of the Portuguese caravels edging their way along the coast. By the time we reach charts from the early 1500s, the story accelerates. The islands of the Caribbean burst onto the scene, followed swiftly by the unmistakable, bulging shape of Brazil's eastern coast. This step-by-step unveiling is breathtakingly logical. It shows the Portolan system working exactly as we would expect a cutting-edge information network to work, absorbing verified data from the frontier and publishing it for those who could afford the update. This progression is without doubt the most powerful evidence for the standard historical view. It demonstrates that the chartmakers were not working from a single ancient blueprint, but were active participants in the age of discovery, their vellums serving as the live, updating screens of their era. The mystery, therefore, sharpens its focus. If the broad sweep of the Atlantic's charting follows the official record so neatly, then the true enigma lies not in the whole, but in the specific, stubborn detail that refuses to fit the timeline. It is the single headland drawn too accurately decades early, the island chain placed with a precision that should have been impossible, the name of a river written on a coast no European ship had yet reached. These are the anomalies that disrupt the clean narrative, the quiet data points that suggest, amidst the flood of new information, a few pieces of very old knowledge were already waiting in the chartmakers' files, patiently anticipating their moment to be understood. Amid the precise web of Rhumb lines, you will often find a dragon. The blank spaces on a Portolan chart, those areas beyond the known coast, were not left empty. They were filled with a vivid bestiary of imagination, elaborate illustrations of cities with towering walls, portraits of foreign kings holding scepters, fluttering banners of distant empires, and of course, the sea monsters. These creatures coil in the open ocean, their scales meticulously drawn, their jaws open as if about to swallow an unwary ship. This is not a flaw in the map's logic, it is an essential part of its language. The medieval mind did not compartmentalize knowledge the way we often do today. For the chartmaker and the sailor, empirical fact and symbolic meaning were woven from the same thread. A sea serpent drawn in a particular stretch of water was not necessarily a belief that a literal beast lived there, though some may have thought so. It was a standardized warning symbol, a cartographic shorthand that said, "Here be dangers." The waters here are treacherous with reefs, or the currents are unpredictable, or this region is beyond our reliable knowledge. Proceed with extreme caution. It was a functional alert system rendered in art. Similarly, the miniature paintings of walled cities and regal figures were displays of political and commercial intelligence. They told the user who controlled a territory which ports were wealthy and fortified, and where alliances or conflicts might exist. A flag planted on a coastline was a piece of strategic data as crucial as the shape of the bay itself. This lavish decoration transforms the chart from a mere tool into a tapestry of the medieval worldview. It reveals a culture that understood the world through a dual lens, one eye fixed on the pragmatic details of wind and coastline, the other gazing into a realm of symbolism, faith, and deep-seated myth. The map had to serve both masters, guiding a ship safely to a profitable port while acknowledging the profound mystery that still shrouded most of the earth. The uncharted ocean was not just a blank, it was an active psychological space, a place where the rules of the known world dissolved and anything was possible. Filling it with art was a way to confront that vast unknown, to domesticate the terror of the void with familiar images of monsters and kings. This artistic layer does not undermine the chart's accuracy, it contextualizes it. It shows us that the drive to map the world was never purely scientific. It was also deeply human, driven by curiosity, fear, commerce, and a need to tell stories about the edges of existence. The precise coastline of Italy could coexist with a giant fish devouring a ship off its coast because both represented a kind of truth to the people who used the map. One was a truth of measurement, the other a truth of experience and belief. This beautiful, paradoxical blend is the chart's final gift to us. It captures a moment in the history of thought, a fleeting equilibrium where the age of measurement was dawning, but the age of myth had not yet lost its power to explain the deep, dark water just beyond the last Rhumb line. The dragon on the map was sometimes a warning, but other times the error was far more subtle. In the quiet scriptoriums where these charts were painstakingly reproduced by hand, the line between preserving knowledge and corrupting it was perilously thin. Every new copy of a Portolan chart was an opportunity for a mistake to enter the record, a mistake that could then be copied again and again, hardening from a simple slip of the pen into an accepted geographic fact. This was cartography as a centuries-long game of telephone where a misheard name, a smudged line, or a moment of artistic license could create entire phantom lands that would haunt mariners for generations. Understanding this process of error propagation is not about dismissing the charts, but about learning to read their layers, to separate the signal of genuine discovery from the persistent noise of human mistake. Consider the work of the copyist. He is not the original cartographer, the one who spoke with sailors and synthesized the reports. He is a skilled artisan, perhaps a monk or a workshop apprentice, tasked with replicating a precious, expensive master chart onto a fresh sheet of vellum. His job is fidelity, but the process is fraught with potential for drift. The light in the room is poor, the inkwell spills. He misreads a tiny label written in a cramped, unfamiliar script. A tired eye might see a series of coastal dashes meant to indicate shoals and interpret them as a solid coastline, inadvertently extending a peninsula or closing off a bay. More dramatically, an entire island drawn on one chart might, through a combination of smudging and creative interpretation, be duplicated on the next copy, creating a twin that never existed. Once that error was embedded in a new master, it could be replicated across a dozen subsequent charts, becoming canon. The original, correct chart might be lost or worn out, leaving only the family of maps containing the mistake to speak for posterity. A legendary example of this phenomenon is the phantom island known as High Brasil. Long before the Portuguese ever reached South America, medieval charts consistently showed an island of this name in the Atlantic, west of Ireland. It was often drawn as a perfect circle, sometimes with a channel splitting it in two. For centuries, sailors searched for it. It appeared on official maps and navigational guides. The island was a persistent ghost, a place that everyone knew was there because the chart said so. Its origins are murky, likely stemming from Celtic myth, but its stubborn presence on parchment was a direct result of uncritical copying. One chartmaker included it from an older source, and the next copyist faithfully reproduced it, and so on for hundreds of years. The fascinating twist is that when Portuguese explorers finally encountered the massive landmass in the South Atlantic, they named it Terra do Brasil, after the valuable Brazil wood tree found there. Yet the phonetic echo of the phantom high Brasil is irresistible. It creates a haunting, almost poetic link between a cartographic myth and a continental reality, a coincidence of naming that feels like destiny, but likely stems from the messy, error-prone process of how geography was recorded and transmitted. This mechanism provides a powerful, sobering tool for debunking certain apparent mysteries. When we look at an old chart and see a coastline that vaguely resembles, say, Florida or a fragment of Antarctica, we must apply this filter of copyist error. Could that shape be a distorted, misplaced version of a known place? Perhaps a cartographer, working from a damaged or poorly understood source, took the outline of the Bay of Biscay and accidentally transposed it to the edge of his parchment, where a modern viewer now sees an uncanny match for the Gulf of Mexico. What looks to us like pre-Columbian knowledge of the Americas might, in some cases, be a lucky stylistic coincidence, the way a naturally jagged coastline drawn with a certain technique can, to a hopeful eye, resemble another jagged coastline thousands of miles away. The human brain is wired to find patterns, especially when we are searching for confirmation of a fascinating idea. Therefore, the discipline of cartographic forensics requires a double vision. We must admire the charts for their breathtaking accuracy where it is verifiably earned, and we must simultaneously scrutinize them for the telltale scars of duplication error. A sudden, perfect geometric shape in a sea of naturalistic coastlines is a red flag. A landmass that appears fully formed in one era and then fragments or vanishes in the next suggests a myth in the process of being corrected. This does not rob the Portolan charts of their wonder, it adds a crucial layer of humanity to their story. They are not infallible oracles, they are collaborative, evolving, and wonderfully flawed human documents. Every line is a decision, and every decision is an invitation to wonder. Was this drawn from life, copied from authority, or invented to fill a silence that the mapmaker could not bear? The compass rose at the heart of every Portolan chart holds a silent assumption, one that introduces a hidden layer of complexity to their precision. These navigational webs were built on the belief that magnetic north, the direction a compass needle points, was the same as true north, the fixed geographic pole. We now understand this is rarely the case. The angle between these two norths, called magnetic declination, shifts depending on where you are on the planet, and it even changes slowly over centuries as the Earth's molten core churns. This means a Portolan chart crafted in Genoa, calibrated perfectly for the local magnetic conditions of the Mediterranean, would become subtly distorted the moment a sailor tried to use its Rhumb line network to cross the Atlantic. The straight line meant to guide him from Lisbon to the Azores would, in reality, curve slightly off course, a deviation born from an invisible force the mapmaker could not have measured. This isn't a flaw in the chart's design, but a fingerprint of its origin. Modern researchers have begun to treat these ancient vellums as extraordinary scientific datasets. By carefully analyzing the systematic skew in the Rhumb line networks, scholars can perform a kind of cartographic forensics. They can compare the magnetic error encoded in the parchment with historical models of how the Earth's field has shifted. If the distortion on a particular chart matches the predicted declination for, say, Barcelona in the year 1350, it offers powerful, independent evidence for when and where that map was actually drafted. This transforms our understanding of the charts from static pictures into dynamic recordings. They are not just maps of the coast, but also accidental maps of the planet's magnetic personality at a specific moment in time. Each one is a frozen snapshot of a relationship between the sailor's compass and the spinning Earth, a relationship that was constantly, imperceptibly changing. This scientific approach doesn't solve the mystery of their coastlines, but it adds a profound new dimension to the investigation. It reminds us that every line inked by a medieval hand is a multi-layered message, containing not only geographic knowledge but also a hidden signature written by the planet itself, waiting centuries for the right key to unlock its meaning. These charts survived not because they were understood, but because they were beautiful. In the hushed, candlelit libraries of Renaissance princes and popes, the Portolan charts found a final, unlikely home. Tucked away in the Vatican's secret archives or displayed as treasures in the studiolo of a duke in Urbino, these practical navigational tools were transformed. They were no longer stained by salt spray, but admired as objects of exquisite craftsmanship, their vellum glowing under the light of a high window, their compass roses gilded, their coastlines inked with an artist's precision. The very people who preserved them, the monks who catalogued them, and the humanist scholars who pored over newly recovered texts from antiquity, were often looking right past the mystery. To a learned cardinal in the 15th century, a chart showing the coast of Africa was not a historical anomaly. It was a contemporary report, a symbol of the expanding world his church and his kings were striving to control. Its value was in its utility and its splendor, a testament to human ingenuity and the power of the patron who owned it. The deepest secret of these documents lay hidden in plain sight, protected by a kind of intellectual camouflage. Because the charts were so clearly modern, so clearly products of their time, their custodians did not think to ask the questions we ask today. They did not compare the shape of a coastline on a chart from 1350 with the official record of exploration from 1492, because that official record did not yet exist. The chart was the record. This creates a profound irony. The survival of the Portolan charts, the very reason we can sit and puzzle over their implications centuries later, is due to a fundamental misunderstanding. They were saved for reasons that had almost nothing to do with their most explosive potential meaning. They were saved as art, as technology, as status symbols. A duke might commission a lavish atlas to demonstrate his worldliness, to show he was a man of science and commerce, not just war. A pope might consult a chart to understand the geopolitical landscape of a Mediterranean fraught with Ottoman fleets. In these rarefied settings, the chart was stripped of its original, gritty purpose. The Rhumb lines became decorative webs, the sea monsters artistic flourishes, the precise coastlines mere evidence of good draftsmanship. The librarians who carefully stored them in oak chests were preserving a tool, but not necessarily the truth the tool implied. They were curators of a question they did not know was being asked. This is the fragile thread by which so much knowledge hangs. It passes through time not because its full significance is recognized, but because it is valued for some other, more immediate quality, its beauty, its rarity, its novelty. The Portolan charts whisper to us now because they were once prized possessions of the powerful, kept safe in stone palaces far from the damp and the rats that would have consumed them on a ship. Their survival is a gift of Renaissance vanity and scholarly pride, a gift that allowed these silent, stubborn documents to wait patiently for an age that would finally look at them and see not just a map, but a mystery waiting in the lines. The mystery of the Portolan charts is no longer confined to the library. Today, it lives in the laboratory, where a suite of modern forensic tools is bringing a new kind of clarity to the ancient vellum. Historians and scientists now collaborate in an interdisciplinary investigation, applying techniques the original chartmakers could never have dreamed of, peeling back layers of time with a precision that borders on the magical. It begins with the physical object itself. Radiocarbon dating analyzes the parchment not by reading its ink, but by measuring the faint, decaying signal of carbon isotopes within the animal skin itself. This provides a reliable window for when the animal lived, anchoring the chart in a specific century. Then, spectral analysis turns its eye to the inks. By shining specific wavelengths of light on the faded lines, scientists can identify the unique chemical fingerprints of the ingredients, distinguishing an iron gall ink from a carbon-based one, and sometimes even detecting traces of pigments that reveal later additions or forgeries. This material analysis builds a forensic profile of the artifact, separating authentic medieval work from clever modern intrusions. The most transformative tool, however, exists in the digital realm. Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, allow researchers to perform a feat that would have taken a lifetime with rulers and pencils. They can scan a high-resolution image of a Portolan chart and then digitally overlay it onto a satellite-accurate modern map of the same coastline. With a few clicks, they can stretch, rotate, and compare. This isn't about a vague resemblance, it is about quantification. GIS software can calculate the statistical correlation between the medieval outline and the real one, generating a precise measure of its accuracy. It can identify which sections are remarkably faithful and which are distorted, mapping the errors with scientific rigor. This digital analysis reveals hidden patterns in the distortions themselves. If a chart's stretching or skewing is not random, but follows a consistent mathematical pattern, it can be a profound clue. For instance, a particular pattern of distortion might align with the systematic error introduced by using a specific map projection, a method of flattening the curved Earth onto a surface. Finding such a pattern would be like discovering the ghost of a mathematical formula within the hand-drawn lines, strongly hinting that the chartmaker was copying from a source that already employed a sophisticated cartographic technique. It moves the question from what they knew to how they were thinking about representing the world. This scientific toolkit is doing more than providing new data. It is slowly changing the nature of the debate. It brings a forensic clarity that separates plausible, evidence-based theories from pure speculation. Anecdotal observations about a coastline looking like another are now tested against statistical models. Claims about a chart's age are verified or challenged by radiocarbon dates. The quest to understand the Portolans has evolved from a historical puzzle into a cutting-edge historical science, where chemistry, physics, and computer modeling work in concert with traditional archival research. Each scan and spectral reading is a step toward listening more carefully to what these silent charts have been trying to say for 700 years, translating their whispers from the language of ink and vellum into the unambiguous dialect of data. Our fascination with these charts is not purely academic. It is deeply, undeniably human. The very idea of a lost map, a secret voyage, a civilization that knew more than we thought possible, taps into a profound psychological current. We are drawn to stories of hidden histories and rediscovered truths because they promise a world more mysterious and more meaningful than the one in our textbooks. They allow us to participate in a grand unveiling, to feel like we are part of a select group that sees beyond the official story. The Portolan charts are a perfect vessel for this desire precisely because they are real. They are not vague legends, but tangible, perplexing objects that sit in museum cases, their very existence a quiet challenge to a neatly ordered past. This creates a powerful tension. We want the mystery to be true. We want to believe that ancient sailors glimpsed Antarctica, or that a master chart from Alexandria survived the flames. That yearning can color how we see the evidence, making us more receptive to a tantalizing theory and perhaps less critical of its weaknesses. This psychological allure is not a flaw, it is a fundamental part of the story. It is the engine that drives both the wildest speculation and the most rigorous scholarship. The same sense of wonder that leads someone to imagine Atlantean navigators also compels a historian to spend years in an archive, or a scientist to develop a new technique for analyzing medieval ink. Both are seeking answers motivated by the thrill of the unsolved. Recognizing this inner drive is our most important tool for navigating the mystery. It allows us to step back and ask with clearer eyes, are we following the evidence where it leads, or are we asking the evidence to lead us to a place we already wish to go? The most honest exploration of the Portolan enigma requires this double vision, holding both our capacity for awe and our commitment to scrutiny in balance. The charts invite us to dream, but they also demand that we think. But what if the mystery is not in the map, but in our own desire to see one? A compelling counter-argument asks us to consider a different kind of genius, one built not on lost secrets, but on the remarkable power of human estimation. Skeptical historians propose a simpler, yet no less extraordinary, explanation for the Portolan chart's accuracy. They suggest we have overstated the precision. A coastline drawn with a confident, sweeping curve does not necessarily mean a cartographer possessed a detailed survey. It could mean he was a master of synthesis, an artist skilled at turning vague, second-hand reports into a shape that felt geographically true. Consider the most famous example, the gradual appearance of Africa's outline. For centuries, classical geography and Arab traders had described Africa as a vast continent almost entirely surrounded by water. A clever mapmaker, knowing it was a landmass that could, in theory, be sailed around, might logically draw it as a large, southward-pointing peninsula. The specific bays and capes could be educated guesses, filled in over time as Portuguese ships confirmed or corrected the broad silhouette. What we interpret as pre-knowledge of a coastline might simply be the result of a talented draftsman connecting a few known points with an elegant, plausible curve. The human mind is exceptional at pattern completion. Given a few fragments of reliable data, like the positions of the Canary Islands and the Horn of East Africa, a skilled estimator could interpolate the missing middle with a shape that, through sheer luck and geographical logic, ended up being remarkably close to reality. This process of informed guesswork extends to the chart's most tantalizing anomalies. That landmass in the Western Atlantic that some see as a crude Brazil could be a misplaced fragment of Asia, drawn from the descriptions of Marco Polo. Or it could be a cartographic convention, a standard decorative island shape that mapmakers used to fill empty space, which later generations, with the benefit of hindsight, now desperately want to identify as the New World. Our modern eyes, armed with satellite imagery, look at these old vellums and immediately search for matches. We might see the bump of a peninsula and declare it Florida, when the original artist may have intended nothing more than a stylistic flourish to indicate uncertain territory. This skeptical view does not diminish the cartographers. In fact, it elevates them in a different way. It suggests their greatest skill was not in copying a secret template, but in navigating the fog of incomplete information. They were listeners and translators, taking the excited, contradictory tales from sailors, the cryptic notes from ancient texts, and the demands of their wealthy patrons, and weaving them into a coherent, usable picture. Their intuition was their compass. They made bold inferences based on the logic of how landmasses tend to form, how rivers meet the sea, how coastlines erode. Sometimes they guessed right. Often, they guessed wrong, creating phantom islands and distorted continents that would mislead explorers for generations. But occasionally, their synthesis of rumor, reason, and artistic license produced a silhouette that future voyages would validate. This is not a story of forgotten data, but of brilliant deduction. It reminds us that before the age of GPS and satellite surveys, understanding the world was an act of collective imagination. The map was a hypothesis, constantly tested and revised by the reality of the next ship that returned to port. The simplest explanation may be that these charts are exactly what they appear to be, magnificent products of their time, reflecting not the knowledge of a lost age, but but the formidable, intuitive skill of the medieval mind when faced with a blank page and a sea of stories. Yet for all their startling precision, these charts also contain spectacular mistakes. The Indian Ocean, a vast body of water known to Arab and Asian traders for centuries, is often drawn as a giant lake, completely enclosed by a southern landmass that curls up to connect Africa with Asia. This was not a small error, but a fundamental misunderstanding of the planet's geography, directly inherited from the ancient Greek geographer Ptolemy. His model, which described a landlocked Indian Ocean, was treated as authoritative scripture by many medieval scholars, even as Portolan chartmakers updated coastlines from sailor reports. They sometimes left this colossal theoretical error uncorrected, grafting their practical coastal data onto an incorrect global framework. The result is a fascinating cognitive dissonance on Vellum, where the coast of India might be drawn with reasonable accuracy, yet it borders an ocean that has no outlet to the wider sea. This tells us something crucial about their process. When direct empirical data from sailors was available, they used it, and the maps shine with local truth. But in the absence of that data, they fell back on the best theoretical knowledge they had, even if that theory was profoundly wrong. The same principle explains other persistent distortions. The orientation of Asia is often skewed, with the subcontinent tilted and the Far East compressed, because the overland distances described by travelers like Marco Polo were difficult to translate accurately into maritime coordinates. The Mediterranean Sea, the heart of their world, is almost always drawn too large in proportion to the rest of the globe. This makes perfect psychological sense. It was the sea they knew best, the center of their commerce and culture, so it dominated their mental map of the world. These are not random blunders, they are systematic errors that trace the contours of their knowledge. They are the shadows cast by the light of their understanding. Where the light was direct and constant, the coastlines are sharp and true. Where the light was faint, refracted through ancient texts or second-hand tales, the shapes blur and twist into familiar myths. So when we see a chart that gets the shape of Scandinavia eerily right but turns the Indian Ocean into a pond, we are seeing a perfect snapshot of the medieval geographical mind in action. It was a mind capable of meticulous observation in its own backyard, yet still beholden to classical authority and speculative tradition when gazing toward the distant, rumored edges of the earth. These mistakes are not failures, they are a diagnostic tool. They map the limits of the network, showing us exactly where the chain of sailors' reports ended and the realm of scholarly guesswork began. To understand what these charts might have gotten miraculously right, we must first honestly acknowledge what they clearly and instructively got wrong. The final evolution of the Portolan chart was not an ending, but a transformation that reshaped the world. Its core innovation, the web of straight Rhumb lines designed for a sailor's compass, presented a problem that would puzzle cartographers for another 2 centuries. On a flat chart, a Rhumb line is straight, but on the curved surface of the Earth, it is a spiral called a loxodrome. This meant that while the Portolan system worked brilliantly for short hops across the Mediterranean, it broke down over oceanic distances, causing increasing navigational errors. The solution arrived in 1569 from the mind of a Flemish scholar named Gerardus Mercator. His famous world map projection was the global answer to the Portolan's local genius. Mercator realized that by mathematically stretching the latitudes as one moved away from the equator, he could achieve a miraculous feat. On his new map, any straight line drawn between 2 points would represent a constant compass bearing, just like the old Rhumb lines, but now it would work accurately across any ocean on the planet. The Portolan's practical heart, the idea that a navigator should be able to plot a simple, straight course, was preserved and perfected for a global scale. Mercator did not invent a new idea, he solved the equation that the Portolan charts had posed. In doing so, he built the very framework for modern cartography, the grid upon which our maps are still based today. This direct lineage is the Portolan's quiet, monumental legacy. It was more than a tool, it was a philosophy. For centuries, European maps had served dual masters, attempting to balance the spiritual geography of faith with the physical needs of travelers. The Portolan chartmakers made a radical choice. They ignored the interior where dragons and mythical kings might dwell, and focused with laser precision on the usable edges of the sea. This was a profound shift from a symbolic, theological view of the world to an empirical, practical one. The map was no longer an illustration of divine order, it was a manual for human action. This emphasis on utility over doctrine created the intellectual scaffolding for the age of discovery. It trained a generation of patrons and pilots to think of the ocean not as a forbidden void, but as a calculable space that could be measured, crossed, and mastered. When Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal, established his school of navigation at Sagres, he did not fill it with theologians. He gathered astronomers, shipwrights, and cartographers, the direct descendants of the Portolan tradition. The charts became the secret weapon of empires, enabling the Portuguese to navigate the treacherous west coast of Africa and Columbus to dare his westward voyage. They provided the confidence to leave sight of land because they offered a system, a repeatable method for finding one's way back. In this way, these medieval vellum scrolls were a vital bridge in human thought. They carried the practical wisdom of the medieval sailor forward, fused it with Renaissance learning and ambition, and handed it to the modern age. They mark the moment when our relationship with the planet changed from one of fearful wonder to one of measured exploration. The lines on those charts did not just guide ships, they guided a civilization toward a new way of seeing its place in the world. These 4 questions now hang in the air, the quiet pulse at the heart of the mystery. Where did the sudden, technical sophistication of the 13th century Portolan come from? It appears with no clear evolutionary precursor, a fully formed system of Rhumb lines and precise coastlines as if downloaded from a more advanced source. This leap defies our expectation of gradual progress, suggesting a forgotten catalyst, a moment of synthesis where a brilliant mind or a recovered document changed everything. The second puzzle is geographic in scale. How did cartographers produce accurate outlines of entire continents, like the recognizable silhouette of Africa or the Arabian Peninsula, lands far beyond the daily routes of the Mediterranean sailors who supplied their local data? This points to a source of knowledge with a truly global, or at least trans-regional perspective, a vision of the world as a whole that the chartmakers' own methods could not have constructed piece by piece. Third, we must confront the most tantalizing enigma of all, the Specific Chinese letter features. If rigorous analysis ever verifies that a chart depicts a coastline or an island with precision decades or even a century before any documented European arrival, the implications are profound. A single verified Chinese letter detail would be a crack in the timeline, evidence of a voyage, a contact, or a transmission of knowledge that our history books have missed. Finally, there is the magnificent practical mystery of the synthesis itself. Even if we accept the collective wisdom theory, the mechanical process remains awe-inspiring. How did a workshop in Majorca take thousands of individual sailing logs, each with its own estimates of bearing and day's sail, and distill them into a single, scaled, and coherent drawing on a sheet of vellum? This was a computational problem of immense complexity, solved with intuition, cross-referencing, and an artisan's feel for the truth hidden within conflicting reports. We may never find a single, neat answer that solves all 4 puzzles at once. The true story is likely a tapestry woven from many threads, recovered classical theory, vibrant multicultural exchange, clandestine commercial exploration, and yes, perhaps a few fragments of genuinely lost voyages whose records perished at sea. Yet the enduring value of these questions is not in their final resolution, but in the journey of asking them. The pursuit has fundamentally reshaped our view of the medieval world. The Portolan charts force us to discard the old myth of a dark age. They reveal instead a period of intense, connected, and sophisticated inquiry, a time when sailors, scholars, and artisans across cultures were engaged in a collaborative project to measure and map their reality with tools both elegant and effective. The mystery, therefore, is not a barrier to understanding, but the very gateway through which we gain a deeper, more respectful appreciation for the ingenuity of a past we are only beginning to comprehend. A coastline drawn in ink is also a line of possession. The very act of naming a place on these charts, of fixing its shape and recording it for others, was a subtle but profound assertion of control. When a Genoese cartographer wrote the name Cabo Verde on the African coast, he was not merely describing geography. He was translating a local reality into a European framework, marking that point on the map for the merchants, missionaries, and militaries who would follow. The Portolan chart, for all its technical brilliance, was never a neutral document. It was created within a specific world of fierce commercial rivalry and growing imperial ambition. Its primary purpose was to enable safer, more profitable travel for the powers that commissioned it, the maritime republics and emerging nation-states of Europe. The knowledge it contained was a strategic asset designed to facilitate trade, yes, but also to enable the projection of power across ever greater distances. This maps the uncomfortable pivot in our story. We have marveled at the mystery of how they knew these coastlines, but we must also ask, to what end was this knowledge ultimately used? The charts themselves are silent on the human cost, but history is not. The same Rhumb lines that guided a merchant ship to a new market for spices could, within a generation, guide a fleet of carracks carrying soldiers to establish a fort. The accurate depiction of a river estuary was not just a navigational aid, it was a blueprint for where to anchor an invasion force. This is the sobering shadow cast by the Portolan's light. Their creation coincided with the very beginnings of the European colonial project. They provided the geographical confidence that made sustained overseas empire possible. Before you can claim a territory, you must first be able to find it and find your way back to it reliably. These charts provided that repeatable pathway. They turned the terrifying unknown of the ocean into a calculated space that could be managed, divided, and owned. This does not diminish their cartographic genius, but it complicates our admiration. It forces us to hold two truths in our hands at once. We can be in awe of the medieval mind that could produce such an accurate representation of the world, while also recognizing that this tool would become instrumental in a long and often painful history of exploration turning to exploitation. The drive for geographical knowledge has rarely been purely philosophical. It has almost always been intertwined with the desires for resources, for strategic advantage, for religious conversion, and for dominion. The Portolan charts stand at that crossroads. They are monuments to human curiosity and ingenuity, but they are also the opening pages of a much darker chapter in the story of how the world became connected. To study them honestly is to acknowledge this full legacy, to see the map not just as a window into a past mystery, but as a catalyst for the world that followed. The dense, guarded silence of the archive has finally been broken by the quiet hum of a server. In a transformative act of digital preservation, venerable institutions like the British Library and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France are placing their priceless Portolan charts online, scanned in breathtaking gigapixel resolution. With a click, anyone, anywhere, can now zoom across the crackling vellum of a 14th century chart from Majorca, following a single Rhumb line from Genoa to Alexandria, or tracing the elegant script of a port name along the coast of Africa. This is more than simple digitization. It is a profound democratization of a mystery that was once the exclusive domain of a handful of scholars and curators. The physical barriers of geography, institutional access, and fragile artifacts have dissolved, replaced by a global, open invitation to look, to question, and to discover. Suddenly, the solitary work of the historian has become a vibrant, worldwide conversation. In online forums, specialized subreddits, and dedicated cartography blogs, a new kind of collaborative detective work is flourishing. A retired engineer in Toronto can spend an evening analyzing the distortion patterns in a charts room line network, posting her findings for a doctoral student in Lisbon to compare with his archival notes. An amateur linguist in California can focus on deciphering a faded toponym in the margin of a digitized chart, cross-referencing it with medieval trade documents she finds in another digital repository. The collective gaze of thousands of curious minds, each bringing different skills and perspectives, is now trained on these ancient documents, a detail that might have gone unnoticed for decades in a dim library reading room can be spotted in an afternoon by a sharp-eyed graphic designer in Seoul, who shares a screenshot that sends a new wave of speculation rippling through the community. This is the era of citizen science applied to history, and it is changing the very nature of the investigation. The mystery of the Portolan charts is no longer a locked room puzzle for academics. It is an open-source project for humanity. The digital resurrection does more than preserve, it activates. It allows for immediate, side-by-side comparisons that were once a logistical nightmare. You can have two browser windows open, one displaying the precise coastline of Brazil from a modern satellite map, and the other showing the enigmatic western landmass on the Cantino planisphere of 1502. The ability to overlay, to adjust transparency, to measure pixels, puts analytical tools into the hands of anyone with curiosity and an internet connection. While professional scholars provide essential rigor and context, the crowd-sourced observation of a global audience creates a powerful, amplifying effect. Patterns emerge more quickly, anomalies are flagged and debated in real time, and forgotten references are suddenly connected by someone halfway across the world. This public engagement is the ultimate safeguard for the legacy of these charts. It ensures that the questions they pose will not fade away with a passing generation of specialists, but will be continually rediscovered and re-examined by fresh eyes. A high school student fascinated by old maps can fall down a digital rabbit hole and emerge years later as a doctoral candidate with a novel theory. The online buzz, the passionate debates, the shared awe at a beautifully rendered compass rose, all of this generates a living, breathing culture of wonder around these artifacts. The charts are no longer static relics behind glass. They are dynamic subjects of a never-ending global conversation. Their digital life guarantees that the puzzle they represent, a blend of measurement, myth, and human ambition, will continue to captivate, challenge, and inspire us for centuries to come, inviting every new generation to look closely and ask, what secret are you trying to tell us? The lines on these ancient charts have not simply faded into history. They have been redrawn onto the canvas of our modern dreams. The very qualities that make the Portolan charts so compelling to historians, their cryptic precision and air of forbidden knowledge, have made them irresistible to storytellers. They have sailed out of the archives and into our novels, our films, and our games, becoming powerful symbols in the language of modern mystery. In his labyrinthine novel, The Island of the Day Before, the scholar and novelist Umberto Eco placed a Portolan chart at the heart of his tale. For Eco, the chart was not just a prop, it was a character, a physical embodiment of the 17th century's struggle between old knowledge and new discovery, between the symbolic world and the empirical one. His protagonist pores over the map, seeking a secret that is as much philosophical as it is geographical, turning the vellum into a puzzle box of meaning. This literary adoption set a powerful precedent. It established the Portolan chart in popular culture as more than a map. It became a key, a literal and metaphorical guide to hidden truths. From there, the charts found a natural home in tales of secret societies and alternate histories. Imagine a thriller where the true lineage of a hidden order is not written in a book, but encoded in the Rhumb lines of a 15th century nautical map. Or a story where the chart proves a civilization older than Atlantis mapped the world, its clues waiting to be deciphered by a modern protagonist. The charts provide a perfect blend of authenticity and enigma, their very real existence lending credibility to the most fantastical plots. This cultural migration is perhaps most visible in the realm of video games, where world building is paramount. Game designers, in creating immersive historical or fantasy settings, frequently borrow the distinct visual language of the Portolan. You might encounter a quest-giving character who unfurls a vellum map adorned with wind roses and sea monsters, its edges frayed and stained. The game's own world map may be styled after these charts, with a hand-drawn aesthetic and a network of lines guiding the player's journey. This is not mere decoration, it is a direct invocation of a feeling, the sense of holding a piece of secret, practical knowledge in your hands, of being an explorer on the verge of a revelation. This pop culture life performs a fascinating alchemy. It extends the chart's influence far beyond academic circles, embedding their image in our collective imagination. For millions who may never visit a museum or read a scholarly paper, their first encounter with a Portolan chart might be in a blockbuster film or an award-winning game. In that context, the chart is instantly understood. It is an icon of hidden knowledge, of a world that still holds ancient secrets. This transformation reveals something profound about how we interact with history. A tool designed for commerce and survival has been recast as a symbol of intellectual adventure. The charts have transcended their original purpose, becoming a cultural shorthand for the thrill of the unsolved. They remind us that the greatest historical artifacts are not just records of what was known, but vessels for what we continue to imagine, portals through which the mysteries of the past sail on, endlessly, into the stories of our present. The digital glow of a screen can show you every line, but it cannot convey the weight of centuries. To truly understand the Portolan mystery, you must stand in the quiet presence of the object itself. Find your way to a hushed museum gallery, perhaps the Museo Cora overlooking the Piazza San Marco in Venice, or the Maritime Museum within Lisbon's ancient Jeronimo's monastery. Here, in a climate-controlled case, lies a single sheet of prepared skin. The first thing that strikes you is not the map, but the aura. A faint, musky scent of age, of vellum and old oak, seems to emanate from the case. The parchment is not paper white, but a deep, honeyed amber, darkened by time and the oils of countless hands that once guided ships by its light. You lean closer. Now you see the texture, the subtle grain of the animal skin. The minute cracks like a dry riverbed across a continent of knowledge. The black ink of the coastlines has not faded, it has settled, bitten into the surface with a permanence that defies the years. And there, catching the low gallery light, are the compass roses. Their gold leaf, applied by a patient hand over 600 years ago, still glows with a soft, fiery warmth. This is not a picture of a map, it is the map. You are not viewing data, you are witnessing a relic. Every tiny puncture hole along the edge, where it was once pinned to a drafting board, tells a story. Every faint stain, perhaps a drop of salt spray or a circle from a forgotten wine glass, is a mark of its life in the world. This physical encounter does something a digital scan never could. It collapses time. The careful, deliberate pressure of the cartographer's quill is suddenly palpable. You can almost see the curve of his hand as he drew the arc of a bay, the pause as he mixed a new batch of vermilion for a royal crest. The chart is no longer an abstract puzzle. It is a direct sensory link to a human being in a sunlit workshop. concentrating on translating the rumored shape of the world onto a precious surface. This tangible connection makes the mystery intensely personal. The questions are no longer academic, they are whispered directly from the past to you, standing in the present. Why did he draw that line with such confidence? What lost conversation, what fragile scrap of a sailor's log, informed this particular curve of the coast? The quiet of the museum becomes a space for a silent dialogue across the ages. To seek out this encounter is to complete the circuit. You have followed the mystery through theory and debate, through digital analysis and historical context. Now you meet its source, you place yourself in the presence of the artifact that started it all, and in that moment the lines on the parchment cease to be mere marks. They become a message waiting not just to be read but to be felt. That quiet dialogue in the museum gallery is not an ending but an invitation to the future. The riddle of the Portolan charts remains an open case, and the next piece of evidence could surface at any moment. What would a definitive breakthrough actually look like? One possibility lies in the discovery of a lost chart itself, perhaps in the forgotten archive of a noble family, or within a mislabeled portfolio in a national library. The Holy Grail would be a chart covered in detailed marginalia, where the cartographer explicitly names his sources, stating he copied this coastline from a captured Arab Dhouse logbook, or that this western land was drawn from a sketch provided by a Norse trader in Bergen. Such a note would be a seismic event, instantly rewriting our understanding of that specific coastline's provenance. More likely than a single chart, however, is the cumulative power of new tools. Imagine artificial intelligence trained on every known Portolan, analyzing millions of micro-decisions, the curve of every bay, the angle of every script character, the density of every Rhumb line web. This eye could detect stylistic fingerprints invisible to the human eye, tracing a fragment of a map found in Cairo directly back to the specific workshop in Majorca that produced it, or identifying a unique coastline that appears in 3 different charts, proving it was copied from a single, now lost source document. It could separate the signal of genuine, repeated geographic data from the noise of artistic license with unprecedented statistical confidence. Beyond the digital realm, an archaeological find could shift the entire debate. Not a map, but an object. The discovery of an authenticated Norse runestone in a New England riverbed, or a cache of Roman coins sealed in a pre-Columbian archaeological layer in Mexico, would provide the material proof of Trans-Oceanic contact that the charts have only hinted at. Such a find would force historians to re-examine every anomalous line on the Vellum with new seriousness, asking not if, but how that knowledge traveled. The field is vibrantly alive. Scholars are still uncovering new charts in private collections and applying ever more sensitive chemical analyses to the inks and parchments we already have. Each new scan, each fresh pair of eyes, carries the potential for revelation. The most exciting prospect is that the next chapter in this 700-year-old mystery might not be written by a tenured professor, but by an amateur historian with a sharp eye, a data scientist running an experimental algorithm, or a curious viewer like you, looking at a digital scan and noticing a connection everyone else missed. The story of these charts is a testament to the fact that history is not a closed book, but a living conversation. The final line on the map has yet to be drawn. The mystery of these charts is not a spectator sport, it is an open invitation. You hold a seat at the investigations table, not as a passive viewer, but as a potential contributor to a puzzle that has spanned 7 centuries. The tools for this detective work are no longer locked in rare book rooms. They are on the screen in front of you. Begin with the simple, profound act of looking. Visit the digital collections of the Library of Congress or the British Library and pull up a high-resolution scan of the Viscount Magello chart. Zoom in until you see the grain of the vellum. Trace the coast of West Africa with your cursor, and then open a modern satellite map in another window. Compare the shapes, look for the places where the medieval line hugs the reality, and note where it veers wildly into speculation. Read the translations of the place names scribbled in the margins. Is that label in Arabic, Catalan, or a garbled version of a local term? Each name is a clue to who supplied that piece of data. This is how you start to build your own intuition, by seeing the evidence with your own eyes. Your next step is to find your fellow detectives. Online communities dedicated to historical cartography are thriving, filled with amateur historians, retired engineers, linguists, and professional scholars, all debating the same lines you are now examining. Join a forum, read the threads, and do not be afraid to ask a naive question. Often, the most insightful observations come from those not yet burdened by academic consensus. In these spaces, you can share a screenshot of a curious coastline, and within hours, someone might link it to a passage from a 14th century travelogue you have never heard of. Another might overlay it with a map from a different tradition, revealing a pattern. This is history as a collaborative, crowdsourced endeavor, and your fresh perspective is its most valuable currency. As you dive in, arm yourself with two essential tools: a healthy skepticism and a boundless sense of wonder. Practice critical thinking relentlessly. When you encounter a dramatic claim, ask the same questions a scholar would. What is the evidence? Is there a simpler explanation? Could this shape be a copyist's error, a misplaced fragment of a known continent, or a lucky artistic guess? Apply Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest solution is often the best. But then, balance that rigor with a willingness to be astonished. Allow yourself to feel the thrill of the unexplained, the tingle of possibility when a piece just does not fit the official timeline. The goal is not to prove a preconceived idea, but to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if that path winds into uncomfortable, uncharted territory. Your role is to hold both the map and the mystery, to appreciate the chart as a magnificent human achievement while still listening for the whispers of stories it may have accidentally preserved. This is how knowledge grows, not from blind acceptance, but from curious, respectful, and persistent questioning. The next clue is waiting, and it might just be you who connects it. A sheet of vellum is a fragile thing, yet it carries the weight of an entire worldview. The Portolan charts do not give us a single, neat answer, because history itself is not a tidy ledger. Instead, they stand as silent, stubborn witnesses at a profound crossroads, a place where measurable science, practical commerce, and enduring myth all converge. They force us to abandon the idea of a simple, linear story of discovery. What they offer is far richer, a complex palimpsest. Like a parchment that has been scraped clean and written over, our understanding of the past is layered. Knowledge is lost in the fires of libraries, found in the damp holds of shipwrecks, distorted by the hand of a tired copyist, and miraculously preserved in the gold leaf of a compass rose. This is the true nature of historical truth. It is a mosaic, and many of its original tiles are missing. Whether the secret of these coastlines flowed from the collective wisdom of nameless sailors, from precious fragments of a lost Alexandrian library, or from whispers of voyages history never recorded, the impact is the same. These maps forever change our perception of the medieval mind. They shatter the old caricature of a dark age huddled in superstition. In its place, we see a world that was vibrantly connected, intellectually curious, and fiercely pragmatic. The Mediterranean was not a barrier, but a synapse, crackling with the exchange of goods, ideas, and geographic data between cultures. The cartographer in his workshop was a node in a vast, informal network of information, a network that stretched from the Baltic to the Sahara. These charts argue with every precise line that our ancestors were far more capable and interconnected than our modern hubris often allows. This realization is a lesson in humility. It asks us to look at the blank spaces on our own maps, the gaps in our own understanding, and to wonder what future generations will find astonishing about our blind spots. The great cartographic historian J.B. Harley put it perfectly when he observed that maps are never neutral documents, they are arguments. Every map makes a case for a certain version of the world. The Portolan charts present one of history's most compelling arguments. They assert that the human drive to explore, to measure, and to document is older and more sophisticated than our official records can fully capture. They suggest that the timeline of discovery is not a clean line, but a tangled web, with threads that lead into the deep past and fray into mystery. So where does that leave us as we look back at these enigmatic coastlines? It leaves us not with a solved puzzle, but with a deepened sense of wonder. It leaves us with a conversation. What do you think lies at the heart of this mystery? Do you believe the charts are a triumph of medieval synthesis, or do you hear the faint echo of a much older source? Share your own theories and reflections in the comments below. This is a mystery that thrives on the collision of different perspectives. If journeys into history's greatest hidden layers captivate you, consider subscribing for more explorations into the past's unanswered questions. And as you go, carry this final thought from the world of the Portolan charts. Sometimes the most profound truths are not buried in secret codes or lost cities. Sometimes they are hidden in plain sight, patiently waiting on a piece of parchment for someone to look closely, to question deeply, and to read the world anew.